Hello everyone, welcome to Come Sit at My Table. Well, today you're coming on an adventure with me because I am going to try a new recipe. Now, this is a recipe I've kind of put together, and we're going to talk about how that happened in just a few minutes. But this is a squash dressing casserole recipe, and we're going to see how it turns out. If it's no good, you'll never see this video. We'll just delete it. So if you're watching this, you know this turned out really well. Otherwise, we'll never post it. Let's talk about what we're going to use in our dressing casserole, and then we'll talk about why I'm trying this. We're going to start with some cornbread. Of course, if you're going to make dressing, you need cornbread. I'm using a box of crusty southern cornbread mix. It's an 11.5 ounce box, but I'm not using the whole thing. We made it last night, and what we didn't eat for dinner is what I'm going to use to make our dressing. So it's an 11.5 ounce box, but I'm going to use maybe 3/4 of it. I may not even use all of that. We'll see once I start crumbling it. But I can tell you, if you don't want to make a box where you're not going to use the whole thing, you could just make a box of Jiffy cornbread mix, which is, I think, 8.5 ounces. And you would need all of it probably.
But not sweet cornbread.
No, I'm glad you said that. You do not want to use sweet cornbread for a dressing recipe. So don't get honey cornbread or sweet cornbread mix. Make sure it's just plain cornbread mix. I did notice at the grocery store that Jiffy now has a honey cornbread mix. Don't get it. You just want plain cornbread.
Or make your own.
Make your own. We've got a great cornbread recipe on this site, and you can just make your own cornbread if you want to. Then we're going to need some yellow squash. Now, I have never in my life put summer squash in dressing. But you're going to find out why I'm doing this in just a minute. I'm going to tell you the story while we're putting it together. But you're going to need about 5 cups of yellow squash that you have chopped up and cooked. And I'm going to show you how we're going to cook it in just a few minutes. I have already cut up 2. I'm going to cut at least 1 more. I may do 2 more, depending on how much it gives me. But you want about 4 to 5 cups. So we're going to cut that up in just a minute. Then you're going to need some salt to put in the water while you cook your squash. And that's the only salt we will use in this recipe. And don't worry about the salt going in the water to cook the squash. It's not going to absorb all that salt. The salt will stay in the water for the most part, but it will flavor the squash just a little bit. We won't add any more salt than that.
Kind of like when you salt the water for pasta.
Absolutely. We're going to use about a cup of water to boil our squash in. So those 3 things, the squash, the salt, and the water, are going to go into a saucepan and boil in just a minute. Then in a skillet, we're going to put 1 stick of butter that we're going to melt. And I'm going to use a 10-ounce bag of seasoning blend that has onion, celery, red peppers, and green peppers in it, and some parsley flakes. You don't have to use this. If you want to cut up your own, use about, I'm going to say a 1/2 cup of each, 1/2 cup of onion, 1/2 cup celery, 1/2 cup of peppers that are chopped up, into small pieces. And you're going to want to put those in a saucepan or a skillet and cook those a little bit to soften them up. Then we're going to crumble our cornbread in a bowl, and we're going to add a 10.5 ounce can of cream of chicken soup, 1 cup of whole milk, 1 egg. We're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to put in 1 teaspoon of Dano's original seasoning. Now, if you don't have this at home, I wouldn't go out and buy it just for this. You can put in whatever seasoning you want, or you don't have to use it at all. But I think this will really give it some flavor, so I'm going to use 1 teaspoon. And then I'm going to do a teaspoon of sage, because I can't imagine any dressing recipe that didn't have sage in it. I'm only going to use a teaspoon in my Thanksgiving dressing recipe, I use pretty much the whole bottle of sage. So I'm just going to use a little bit in this just to give it some flavor. I don't want to add so much that it overpowers everything else. So just a teaspoon. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get our squash ready. And I have washed all of my squash. By the way, I do have 3 more back here. I noticed that they were laying here and thought I'd better tell you. I have already chopped 2. You can see that I have 2 already cut here, and I'm going to do 1 more. So what am I going to do with those extra 3 squash? Have any ideas, babe?
Oh, I see some fried squash in over here.
You better believe it. I absolutely love fried squash. So when I bought these at the farmer's market, I thought, I know what I'm going to do with those. I'll buy enough for our dressing and to have some fried squash. So we will fry some squash with those, either later today or tomorrow. I just don't think there's anything that's much better than fried squash and fried green tomatoes in the summer. Okay, so I'm going to put those in. These 3 are going to give me a good 4 cups or a little better. The thing is that when you finish cooking these, you're going to mash them a little bit. I'm just going to take a potato masher and mash them up some. You don't want to pulverize them. You still want to see chunks of them in your dressing. But, you want about 2 cups after you've mashed them. Once you get them all mashed up, you want about 2 cups. So I think 4 cups of it chopped. Once it's cooked and mashed, I think that should equal about 2 cups. So we're going to take our squash, our salt, and our water over. And I have already started some water. Let me grab this towel. I don't want to burn my hand. I started the water so that it would be ready to cook. And we're going to add about a teaspoon of salt in there. I'm going to bring that up to a boil again. And we're just going to add in our squash. I'm going to cover that squash and let it start cooking. It's going to take, I'm going to guess, 4 to 5 minutes for it to get tender. So we're just going to let that sit there and cook. All right, put these in my compost bin. Now, the next thing is we're going to cook our vegetables. So we're going to take our butter and put it in our skillet, turn that on, and let that start melting. And then, once that's started to melt, we're going to add our seasoning blend, which again is just onion, celery, and peppers. And you can see these are frozen. I hope you can see that. Those are still frozen. You don't want to thaw those out. We're just going to put them in frozen. Let me get that moved around some. We'll get that started cooking. I should have already had that butter melted, I guess. That would have helped. Okay. Now,
Nobody knows why you're making this. You gotta tell that story.
I'm gonna tell it while I'm crumbling up my cornbread. Okay. So I'm going to move all this out of the way because we're finished with it. Just get it out of our way here. Move my cutting board and all that stuff. My wet towel that my cutting board was on. Okay. Now, why are we doing this? Well, Melissa and I were on a little road trip. Gosh, I don't know how long ago, Melissa.
A couple of months ago.
2 months ago, I guess. We had been to a friend's wedding, and we stopped in a place called Homewood, Alabama, I believe. It's really near Birmingham, just, I think, north of Birmingham. We stopped there to spend the night on the way down. And we got to the hotel. Now, I'm crumbling this up. I don't know, if, Melissa, if you want to show this. I'm not pulverizing it like I necessarily do for my Thanksgiving dressing, but I'm just crumbling it up. So we stopped for the night, went in the hotel, and we had not really had a meal. We hadn't eaten since breakfast. And so I asked the lady at the desk if she could recommend a good restaurant for us. She said, well, what kind of food are you looking for? What do you want? And I said, oh, we just want good country cooking, just, home cooking. And she said, oh, yeah, I can recommend a place. She said, now, it's not a big fancy place. It's not a chain, but man, do they have good food. And I said, that's our kind of place. So she recommended that we go to the next exit back north and that we go to a restaurant called the Pawpaw Patch. I don't know if you've ever eaten a pawpaw, but it is one of my very favorite things in the fall. We have a pawpaw tree in our yard. I've actually planted 4 more that aren't bearing yet, but hopefully they will soon. And so when she said she was going to recommend the Pawpaw Patch, I was all in. I was like, oh yeah, anything that's named the Pawpaw Patch, I'm in for that. So we went to the Pawpaw Patch. So we get in line because it's kind of a cafeteria style. And we started looking at what they had on the bar there, And I didn't recognize one of the dishes, so I asked the gentleman that was behind the counter, I said, can you tell me what this is? And he said, it's squash casserole. And I thought, okay, I've been making squash casserole for probably 40, 45 years. This does not look like any squash casserole. Let me turn this down just a little bit. I thought, this does not look like any squash casserole I have ever eaten. I'm just going to stir those around a little bit, get the rest of that butter melted, and let those start to get tender. So I said, that's squash casserole? And he said, yeah, that's squash casserole. I said, okay, I think I'm going to try that. Well, the thing that threw me off was that it was sliceable. I mean, they sliced it in squares and put it out on your plate. When I've made squash casserole, you kind of dip it out because it's a little loose. It's not something you slice. So I thought, well, I've got to try this. If this is squash casserole, it's a different squash casserole than I've ever eaten. So I got it, and we started eating, and I'm telling you, it was delicious. Oh my gosh, it was so good. But it was not what I call squash casserole. Had a totally different texture, and I even made the comment to Melissa that it was more like dressing. So the waitress came over, the server came over and, asked us if we needed anything. And, I was trying to be funny. And I said, yes, there's only one thing I need. And she said, okay. And I said, I need the recipe for this squash casserole. And she said, oh, yeah. She was being funny back with me. And she said, oh, yeah, I'll just run right in the back and tell the cook to write that down for you. I'm sure he'll just jot it right down. So we laughed. I knew she wouldn't give it to me. I was just trying to be funny. So when she came back a few minutes later, she said, it's really squash dressing. Well, that made sense. I'd never heard of squash dressing. They called it squash casserole, but it wasn't squash casserole. And I'm telling you, it was absolutely delicious. So when we got home, I thought, okay, I have to figure out how to do squash dressing. So I got online and started looking for squash dressing recipes. I'm putting in my can of soup, straight out of the can, straight into my dressing. It just goes straight in there. So I started looking for squash dressing recipes. Well, I found a few, I found several, but none of them really seemed to be exactly the same as what I had had at the Pawpaw Patch. So I started just trying to come up with my own, putting in the milk. just trying to come up with something that I think might be similar to theirs.
So this is just an experiment.
This is an experiment. And like I said earlier, it may never make it to our channel. We're going to find out. I'm going to beat this egg up just a little bit. Doesn't have to be beaten well, but it just needs to, I don't want to put it in there whole. I want it to be mixed up a little bit. So I did not leave with the recipe, which, you know, I did not expect to. I don't expect anybody who's serving food for a living, that's how they're making money, to share their recipe. I was just joking with her, and she knew that because she was joking back with me. But I did appreciate that she came back and said, it's really squash dressing. We just call it squash casserole. Okay, I'm going to put in my half teaspoon of black pepper, because that at least gave me a place to start from. Let me stir these just a minute, Melissa. Don't want those to stick. Oh, they're close. And I think our squash is boiling really well. Okay. I think those are really close. I'm just going to go ahead and turn those off and let them sit there and sweat. So, we're trying a squash dressing. Now, you may have made squash dressing your whole life. I don't know. Maybe it's just me that's never heard of it. So that's a teaspoon of Dan-O's. And I'm going to do a teaspoon of sage. Okay. Now everything's in but our vegetables and our squash. I'm just going to take these vegetables off. And by the way, we're not draining these. The butter is going in with those vegetables. All right. So in goes the butter and the vegetables. I hope I can do this without dropping that skillet. And I don't want to leave any of those in there. So I'm going to scrape those out. Make sure we get all of them. If I can get my hands around this. Okay. Those are in. I'm going to go ahead and mix that up just a little bit before I put my squash in. And we will drain the squash, by the way. We don't want all that water in here. I'm telling you, this already looks delicious.
Goodness gracious, it smells good.
It does, doesn't it? Yum. Now, I am using about a 9x7 pan for this baking dish that I have sprayed with nonstick spray. Okay, we don't want to pulverize it, so I'm going to leave it. Let's go over here and check our squash and see how they're doing. Now, how do we know if they're ready? Well, I'm going to take a little knife and just go into one of them. Oh, yeah. See how easy that goes in? Look at that. It just falls right in there. I don't even have to push it. So those are ready. I don't know. How long was that, Melissa? 4 or 5 minutes?
Maybe a little longer than that.
Yeah, maybe. You just want to let them cook while you're putting the rest of it together. Now, Melissa, I'm going to move over here. If you want to come right here with me. And I'm going to drain these. By the way, I used small squash because the smaller the squash, the smaller the seeds. And you really don't want huge seeds in this. You're going to have some seeds in it, of course, from the squash. But you don't want it full of great, big, huge squash seeds. So I picked out some small little squash. And you might say, well, why'd you put it in that bowl? Because we want to mash it just a little. I'm not going to mash it to death because we want to see those pieces of squash in our dressing. So just a little bit of a mash, not much. Okay, that's all I'm doing. And you know what? There's some liquid down in there now. And I already drained it, so where'd that liquid come from? Well, it was in the squash. But that's not gonna hurt anything. That'll just make it good and moist. So in it goes. Let's stir that together.
I can see this thing a meal by itself.
You know what? If you put some chicken in this, and I hadn't thought of that until you just said that, but if you put some chopped up chicken in this, that is a meal.
Really, yeah.
That
Honestly,
is a
I could eat
meal.
it without the chicken, though.
Yeah, I could. Well, we're going to. Yeah.
But
Okay.
yes, it would make a complete meal if you needed a little extra protein in there.
That's right. If you want to make it a meal, put a little chicken in. Now, this is moist, but it's not sitting in liquid. You want to show this, Melissa? Look here. There's no liquid down in the bottom. You can see that. But man, is it good and moist. And that's what we want. We want it to be good and moist. You do not want to overbake this. The only thing in this that is not already cooked and ready to eat is that one egg. So it's not like we have to cook this to death. You just want it cooked enough so that you can slice it like they did at the Paw Paw Patch. All right, so into our pan we go. We don't want to pack it in, but you will want to even out the top. So once you get it in there, just kind of spread it out. And I want every bit of that in there. Well, I just sloshed a little bit on the counter. Sorry about that. Kind of seems to be what I do.
That's how we know what you...
I know. Can't help it.
I just have to give you a little hard time
Okay.
about that.
We don't want to pack it down in there, but you want the top smoothed out a little bit. And I love that you can see that squash in there. That's awesome. It's going to be so good. Well, I hope it is. Okay.
I'm going to be really disappointed if it's not.
I have preheated our oven to 350 degrees. I'm probably going to bake this. I'm probably going to start at about 30, 35 minutes, 40 minutes maybe, and check it to see if it's done enough that it's holding together. And when it's finished, we're going to come back and give this a try. So in we go. All right, our squash casserole, squash dressing casserole is out of the oven. Let me turn this off. Doesn't that look really good?
It does.
I'm anxious to try it. Now, it's really hot because we
Should
just
you let
took it
it
out.
sit for a bit?
You know, it probably wouldn't hurt for it to sit, to firm up. I think it probably should, but I don't know that I can wait. Oh, yeah, look at that. Even hot, you can still slice it. But man, is it moist. Yeah, you're right. It probably would be better if you let it sit and firm up a little bit. I have to have all that out there. Man, that smells good too. You have to have a bite of squash in with it. You gonna take the first bite?
I think I'm going to wait.
Are you?
You know me.
This is what we're having for lunch today.
I know it's going to be wonderful, but I'm going to let it cool down just a little bit.
We decided while it was baking that this is all we needed for lunch. If it burns my mouth, you may see me spit it out.
Did you do it? Recreate what you had at the
You,
Paw
you,
Paw Patch?
you don't want any of this. You shouldn't eat a bite of this. It's not that hot. I mean, it's hot, but
Okay.
here. I get in trouble with people who are watching if I don't feed you a bite.
Okay.
Ooh, I love the squash in it. Look at that big piece of squash right on top.
That is really good.
Oh my gosh.
And if you are somebody that needs a little meat throw in some cubed up chicken.
Yeah.
Then you've got the whole meal right there.
Absolutely. Delicious.
That's excellent. I'm really proud of you. You did it.
Thank you. That was fun. Had to do a little research and putting things together, but gosh, that's really good.
The flavor's really good.
We're kind of at the end of squash season. So if you have squash that need to be used up, this is a great way to use them. This is a great way to get squash in a dish. And I'm going to tell you, other than maybe they'll see it in there, I don't think anybody would know it even had squash in it. It just really makes it moist.
Guess you could disguise it by squishing it up a little more.
Well, yeah, you could. But I like to see the pieces of
I do
it in
too.
there.
I'm just thinking if somebody didn't think they liked squash.
They'll like this. That's delicious. Okay, we have a new dish. Thank you for watching. We sure would appreciate if you'd go right below this video and click the like button. And if you haven't before, click that subscribe button. There's a little notification bell beside of it. If you'll click it in the word all, that subscribes you to our channel. We like to say it gives you a seat at our table. And then YouTube will notify you every time we add a new video. Also, right below the video, you'll find the description box. It has the title of this dish in it. If you'll click in that box anywhere, that box expands. Melissa always puts a written recipe there for you. And our contact information is right under that recipe. Also, there's a place for you to leave a comment. And we love hearing from people who are watching our videos. So leave us a comment. We'd love to read what you have to say. If you've tried this before, if you've made squash dressing, let us know. How's yours different from ours? Do you do something different that maybe I should try the next time? If you haven't had it before, man, I recommend you do it. That is delicious. All right. Thank you for watching. We want you to remember that you are always welcome to come sit at my table. Have a great day.